In a global society, it is basic that we live in peace with each other. This does not mean that there will be no conflicts. Of course, there will be conflicts. But we need to deal with them without resorting to violence. This is the norm in any democratic country, and it is in fact the norm also between democratic countries. Wars between democracies are absent or almost so, and that is because the means of solving conflicts within the countries are also used to solve conflicts between them. Even if we see much international violence in the daily news, it's comforting to remind oneself that we already have a long history of peace building in many parts of the world. Peace is possible. After about 80 wars over many hundred years of history, the Danish-Swedish relationships, everyone I think agrees, would today not break down into war. We can say the same thing about the European integration project. German-French hostilities have dominated the history of the European continent and partly the world for hundreds of years. But today, war does not seem thinkable in the context of the European Union. The Norwegian Nestor of Peace Research, Johan Galtung, said once that war as a way to handle conflicts should be put on the shelf of historical remains, together with slavery, which finished about 1860, and colonialism, which ended around 1960. It is a comforting fact that there is no classical war, a war between two states, in our world today. This is worth celebrating, since wars have been going on since the beginning of civilization. But we do have internal armed conflicts. These conflicts either deal with the state formation, how to define the states, for example Palestine, or who should be in power, for example in Iraq. Also, these types of conflicts have decreased in numbers since the mid-1990s. But the background is difficult. The 20th century was the most violent in human history. From 1914 to 1989, close to 200 million people were killed in wars, by deportations, in concentration camps, and in other cruel ways by fellow human beings. For good reasons, a top priority of states during this period was national security. Enormous armaments were made. For the first time in history, states were fully armed also when there was no war, and armament became industrialized, the military establishment self-perpetuating. Since the advent of nuclear weapons, the world has been living in a constant threat of self-annihilation. The end of the Cold War did not lead to the end of armament, as many hoped. The costs have been and are still astronomical. The global military budget would easily be enough to reach all the development goals we have now and on the global agenda. Investments in arms mean lost opportunities. We need that money for other purposes. During the 1990s, several disarmament agreements were signed. Many efforts to expand these experiences of disarmament has been done, but so far failed. But we need more of that to enter a culture where national security is reached in other ways than by military force. The alternative is cooperation. European cooperation is the largest peace project ever. The European Union counts 27 member and 3 allied states. No one expects a conflict between these states to lead to war. We have instead created a security community. A similar development is seen in, for example, North America with the US, Canada and Mexico, and in Latin America with Mercosur, and is beginning in Africa with the African Union, for example. A security community has institutions capable of handling all interstate matters. There is a legal regime that regulates interstate affairs, such as trade, environmental impact, and traveling. In a security community, there are multiple opportunities of mediation. There are international courts to handle interstate conflicts. With many kinds of cooperation, possibilities to manage conflict in a single sector increases. All these offer means of peaceful conflict resolution. On the global level, these mechanisms exist but are weaker. There is the United Nations with its close to 200 member states. But the UN is not a global government as some want it to be. It's too limited to make this possible. It is essential that skills in conflict resolution are included in an education for global responsibility. These skills may be concerned with conflicts on state level, but not only that. Conflicts between all kinds of interests are related in many ways. There is a thread from interpersonal or family conflicts to conflicts between companies, municipalities and all kinds of groups in societies, up to conflicts on the state level. We need to learn how to manage and solve conflicts at all those levels. Peace education needs to include not only political science but also diplomacy and peace psychology. The ultimate concern for an education for global responsibility is to develop a culture of peace. An international decade for the culture of peace and non-violence was announced by the United Nations General Assembly as the goal for the decade 2001 to 2010. So it's now that we should show that peace is possible.